This is Our Heritage, a walk-in tour of historic Bridgetown with President of the Barbados National Trust and retired lecturer in the Department of History of the Cave Hill campus, historian Dr. Carl Watson, and Chairman of the Sentinel Committee of the Trust and Dean Emeritus of the Faculty of Medical Sciences of Cave Hill campus of the UWI, Senator Professor Henry Fraser. In the background stands the oldest iconic structure of the Cave Hill campus of the University of the West Indies, the Clock Tower. You might ask, and understandably so, why is a walk-in tour of historic Bridgetown commencing at this noble institution? Well, the tour does not begin here, but the first segment of the program showers accolades on both our tour guides, two gentlemen who have been associated with the UWI for many years. We begin first of all with Dr. Carl Watson, whose award of the Gold Crown of Merit was announced in the Independence Honors 2011 and was presented with his insignia on January the 11th, 2012, the same day on which Barbados celebrated the 360th anniversary of the signing of the Charter of Barbados. As Providence would have it, the honoree's citation was read by his cousin and his fellow tour guide in this Our Heritage series, Senator Professor Henry Fraser.
In 1981, he joined the UB History Department in Jamaica, where he lectured until transfer in 1991 to Cape Town, where he taught a variety of history courses. He introduced the archaeology and heritage programs and gave specialized lectures over the years in both biology department and the faculty of medicine. He supervised more than 70 MA students at their theses and several PhDs. Dr. Watson is president of the Barbados National Trust, has edited the Journal of the Barbados Museum for the past 15 years, is chairman of the Barbados Carolinas Committee and deputy chairman of Bush Hill House. He also served on the task force for the successful nomination of historic Bridgetown and its garrison as a UNESCO World Heritage Site. He is the author of several books, many scholarly articles and papers in the press and magazines on historical and environmental matters, as well as contributing to documentaries for television, including the award-winning Charter of Barbados film produced for CBC by Sherwood McCaskey, which we all saw last Sunday night. He has received awards from many organizations for his heritage and environmental habits. The award of Gold Crown of Merit is made in recognition of his highly meritorious service to education, especially in relation to Barbadian history and heritage.
Like hundreds of students, I have had the good fortune of sitting at the feet of Dr. Carl Watson while pursuing postgraduate studies here in the Faculty of Humanities and Education of the Cave Hill campus of the University of the West Indies. Not only was he coordinator of the Master of Arts degree program in Heritage Studies, Dr. Watson was also one of my lecturers. At all times, he displayed a keen interest in the preservation of this region's history and heritage. Needless to say, we were all the beneficiaries of his knowledge and expertise. My special interest in this field of research is credited to Dr. Carl Watson. And so, on behalf of all of your Heritage Studies students, those involved in this, our Heritage program, we congratulate you on receiving the nation's third highest honor, and we wish you well. Dr. Watson's fellow presenter, Senator Professor Henry Fraser, received that distinguished honor in 1993. On April the 3rd, 2012, Professor Henry Fraser took the oath of office as an independent senator of Barbados. On Wednesday, May the 2nd, Senator Professor Fraser took his seat in the Senate chamber and started to champion the cause which he started many years ago through the media.
But great honor and great privilege carry great responsibility. And as a humble son of the soil of the Republic of St. John, in this our paradise of Barbados, raised by parents who were model public servants, with the abiding principle that to serve is to love, and to love is to serve. I hope and pray that I can do my part and serve the country and am equal to the task.
In the second program in the series, Dr. Watson and Senator Professor Fraser focused on the oldest building in Bridgetown, the Nichols Building.
This building here is regarded generally as perhaps the oldest surviving complete building in Bridgetown, because it's built of brick, it's built at ground level, and it's built with a Dutch gable. And so that gable at the end, with the curves in and out, or curvilinear Dutch gable end, and a door at the top. Why would you think they'd have that door at the top? There would have been a winch up there, and there would have been a winch and a rope, and the storeroom was at the top. This was the Dutch style.
Was Senator Fraser being prophetic? Correctly put, this was the Dutch style. On the weekend of Sunday, January the 15th, workmen were seen altering the roof, and this special piece of the island's past was chipped away. In the wilderness, there were to be found at least 3 voices lamenting the interference.
The achievement of Barbados in having Bridgetown and its garrison inscribed on the UNESCO World Heritage List carries with it enormous plaudits, enormous accolades, but also enormous responsibilities. And an issue has recently cropped up.
The famous Nichols building on the corner of Lucas and James Street has been virtually vandalized in some renovations that are being done to that building. We understand that there must have been some problem with the roof, and in tackling that problem, what has been done is that the building itself and its great history has really been treated with scant respect.
The issues that we're now facing with the Nichols building on James Street are an example of the problems that we are going to constantly face as we protect our World Heritage Site. It's a candle that burns at both ends. We have organizational problems, management problems that come with any World Heritage Site, but we also have issues, frontline issues on the street. We have difficulties that contractors are facing. What is it that they're supposed to do? What can they do? What are the regulations they're supposed to follow? How do owners know the importance of the buildings that they own? And this is what is going on here.
That building has been much written about and talked about. It is almost certainly the oldest comprehensively preserved building in Bridgetown. It is a typical brick-built Dutch building of the mid-17th century. And therefore, in a very real and graphic way, it tells the story of the relationship between the English colonizers and the Dutch, who were very much landowners, merchants, traders, and very much involved in the colonization of Barbados, even though at times the relationships between the Dutch and the English were not the best, they were also not the worst, as with the French. So that building tells a tremendous historical story.
And probably, in my view, the most important building of the colonial period in the entire English-speaking Caribbean.
And what is so special about it is not only the fact that it's 17th century in all its characteristics, but this curvilinear gable. The gable ends have this wonderful combination of curls and straight edges, or curvilinear gable, that is absolutely diagnostic and characteristic of the Dutch buildings.
But more importantly, let me place it within its historical context to explain why I consider it to be the most significant and important historical building of its type and within the time range of the colonial period. Barbados, when this building was constructed, was the richest spot of ground in the world. The Dutch traded openly with Barbados. Barbados was relatively autonomous. That building is iconic and in fact is a metaphor for the Dutch trade and for the subsequent arrangements that the English put in place to defend their trade. I speak now of the Navigation Acts. The first Navigation Acts, one of a series of Navigation Acts, was passed by the British Parliament based entirely or almost entirely on the need to challenge Dutch supremacy in the West Indian trade and specifically here in Barbados. So that building, as I said, is iconic and represents the establishment of the entire economic framework or bottom line that underscored the North Atlantic Economic Trade and Agreements and later the entire trading agreements of the entire British Empire over time. So it is, for a number of reasons, exceedingly important. It recently changed hands.
Now, that building we have just seen has been altered with cement going into all of the profile of the gable edge so that the gable becomes a simple triangular gable. It is a piece of Philistinism, the like of which I haven't really noticed in Barbados in dealing with a building's renovation, although we've seen demolition of important buildings.
I would argue largely through ignorance and not either appreciating or not understanding or not being informed of the historic value of this building. Some renovation work is being carried out which has seriously compromised the integrity of the building and challenges the authenticity of the structure.
We're saying that is one of the most important buildings in Bridgetown, and without Town and Country Planning approval, it has been dramatically and radically vandalized in the interest perhaps of roof repairs, but entirely unnecessary. And it really needs to be corrected now. We hope that the Town and Country Planning Department will carry out its appropriate legislative responsibility and insist that the building be properly restored to its original structure and style.
And authenticity and integrity are two key concepts within the UNESCO mandate, and they are two concepts that any designated World Heritage site, whether it be in Barbados, the Caribbean, or anywhere else in the world, these two principles of conservation and preservation have to be adhered to.
Until we find a mechanism and do it very quickly to, in order to confront these issues directly where they're actually hurting us, this is going to happen time and time again. Anytime somebody wants to start work on a Saturday or Sunday, it is going to be missed, and the authorities are not in a position to do anything until the week following. So the damage that can be done is being done and will continue, and that damages our credibility as a state with a World Heritage Site, and it's something that must be attended to as soon as humanly possible.
Now this renovation work, as I said, has compromised the integrity of the building, and that compromise, I would argue, was not willful destruction done on the part of the workmen or the owner. I think they're acting in genuine ignorance, but without pointing any fingers or without casting blame, let me say that the World Heritage designation demanded immediately after all the accolades and the joyous outpouring had been finished, that demanded a series of workshops to explain to stakeholders in Bridgetown what exactly it is required when one has a building or a structure in a World Heritage Zone, and how one manages it, and how one can engage in areas such as preservation or conservation, restoration. In England, to use an example, a Grade 1 listed building, you cannot even change a screw in that structure without going to the experts and determining how your changes are going to impact the authenticity and integrity of the building. So we need to seriously, very, very seriously, consider the implications of changes to structures such as that Dutch-inspired building known as the Nichols Building in Bridgetown, because if this keeps repeating itself, then our listing as a World Heritage Site will seriously come under scrutiny, and we may be in danger of being delisted, which would be exceedingly unfortunate for Barbados. Having spent so much time, effort and energy to acquire that listing, now let us all join together and live up to what the listing requires from us. And let us share information so that workmen out there, contractors, owners of structures, etc., will be armed with the information necessary so that when they undertake renovations or repairs that may be necessary, you know, repairs or maintenance is always required, especially in a tropical setting. It has to be done in a controlled fashion. It cannot be done in an ad hoc fashion, as apparently has been the case with this structure at the corner of James Street. As I said, we have had a treasure of Bridgetown, one of the linchpins of our dossier, which got us the World Heritage designation. We've had that treasure seriously compromised. It hasn't been lost, thank God it hasn't been demolished or anything like that, but changes have been made which have impacted very negatively on the structure. And so I would appeal to the agencies responsible for overseeing our World Heritage listing to be more vigilant and to communicate more effectively with various stakeholders so that this dreadful mistake that has happened does not repeat itself. This is the position of the Barbados National Trust, because it's quite simple. What is given can be taken away. So therefore, it behoves us to be very careful with our heritage, which underscores the responsibilities that all Barbadians face in order to ensure that we retain our listing on the UNESCO World Heritage List.
Senator Professor Henry Fraser, Dr. Carl Watson, and Peter Stevens all played fundamental roles in Barbados' quest to secure that UNESCO inscription. Senator Fraser was chairman of the Prime Minister's World Heritage Task Force. Dr. Watson was a committee member of that task force. And Peter Stevens did a tremendous amount of work that eventually made up the dossier. Indeed, it was a labor of love for their country. Well, the walking tour of historic Bridgetown now continues. Now, here on Upper James Street, you'll find an interesting wall facade that illustrates aspects of the history of Barbadian building, wonderful texture of brick and coral stone, and the variety of building material and how they were used.
Right here you see two brick columns on either side of this archway, and the archway was filled in many, many years ago with a mixture of cut block coral stone, rough hewn rubble coral stone, and bricks any which way. And when you go across, further across, you will see the piers are often faced by the door jambs with a column of bricks, but next to that column of bricks is rubble stone. So you see the variety of materials that were being used in the first half of the 19th century. It used to be all rubble stone looking like this, shapes of any shape and size looking like that. And then between the abolition of the slave trade and the post-1831 period, a lot of bricks were used because bricks were coming in instead of slaves. All the ships had bricks. And then, of course, in the 1830s, they started cutting the sawn stone, 2 feet long, 1 foot at the end.
These used to belong to the Jewish synagogue, I think. They still do. They were built in 1840. I've been to the Jewish documents, and so I can say that for sure.
And so from James Street, the tour now moves to the oldest synagogue in the Western Hemisphere, with its recently rediscovered mikveh bathhouse and stream of pure water. It remains one of the wonders of the modern world and should be visited by all.
How many people here have actually been into the synagogue? Only about 6. How many people have not? Well, that's a pity. Do come again. It's open to the public during normal working hours. A number of volunteers supervise it. The museum itself has a professional museum curator, Mr. Brewster. Right, absolutely. There's so much about the synagogue, we could talk about this all afternoon, but just a couple of points. The synagogue was definitely here in 1660. It is thought that the first Jew might have come here in 1654. There are a couple of tombs that certainly go back to the period between 54 and 60, and there is a site plan showing the synagogue and the cemetery dated 1660. So we know they were here by 1660. I wrote an article when the synagogue was restored, and I asked, oldest synagogue in the West, ? Because I had just come back from Curacao at the time of the restoration here, and the synagogue in Curacao was built around 1750. They had had an earlier synagogue which had been abandoned, and then they built their present beautiful synagogue around 1750. So that synagogue clearly wasn't as old as this site. But of course this synagogue was, they said, demolished, but clearly rebuilt on exactly the same foundation. Now we know from the demolition of a lot of old houses in Barbados that the roof was whipped off, the top story perhaps, and people usually rebuilt on the same foundations. So I put a question mark after this oldest synagogue in the West, and a group of Jews in Curacao wrote me a joint letter from the Committee of Jury in Curacao threatening to take me to court for perjury. Seriously. I had to seek legal advice about this from Dr. Carmichael, because even though I put a question mark at the end, they claimed that this building could not be labeled the oldest synagogue because it had been demolished in 1831, even though it was rebuilt on site. And they wanted to claim, of course, that the Jews had gone to Curacao in 1651. Therefore, the abandoned synagogue there was the oldest synagogue. So you see how you can get into legal wrangles over fine details of that kind. The interesting thing here at the moment, the topical thing, is what's behind that rubble stone wall. And that is the mikvah. Has everyone heard about the mikvah?
In Jewish religious belief, the Jewish religion is founded on a series of laws, not just in Moses, not just the laws of Moses, although they are the core laws, and we as Christians, we follow them too, the 10 Commandments. But there are other laws in Jewish belief relating to, like the consumption of beef. You can't eat meat that has blood in it. You have to drain the blood for it to be kosher. Now, for a woman to purify herself, she had to do it in specific areas. The water had to be living water. So you couldn't use water in a basin at home. And in those days, you didn't have any tap water or anything like that. So you built your mikvah either by a river, but Barbados had no rivers that you could build a mikvah by. So then you had to locate a spring and build your mikvah on the spring, which is what is done here. Or if you had neither, you could use the sea, because the sea is living water. When Jewish women had children and they wanted to resume sexual activities with their husband, they had to purify themselves. After every menstrual cycle, they had to purify themselves before they could have sex again. So they would go between 7 and 9 at night, and you go downstairs, into this rectangular shaped thing built around a spring, so it's filled with pure water up to about 4 feet deep, and you walk into it completely naked. You couldn't even wear earrings. You had to be completely naked, and then you prayed and immersed yourself completely in the water, and emerged again and said another prayer, and immerse yourself, and then you were clean and you came out, dressed, and went home. Now it's interesting, this mikvah or banyo was filled in. It was filled in with tons of debris. And as my students from the University of the West Indies, and Michael Stoner, my doctoral candidate, and I excavated, and Yaya Johnson, we took out all the debris.
My right-hand man, Urban Johnson, he was over here excavating, and he came across a step, and he said, "Hey Mike, I found a step." I'm like, "Okay." So we started following the steps down. We ended up going 13 feet down below the surface, and we found a chamber. And as we excavated it more, we found that what dirt was in there had turned to mud. So we dug a little hole and let the water fill up, put a pump down there, and we just started pumping out the water and taking out the mud, and just kept on going and kept on going. Finally, we hit a tiled bottom. And once we hit that, we cleaned it up, turned off the pump.
Water started to flow, and then the water flowed, and it filled up to the correct ritual level. Having been empty and filled with debris for nearly 200 years, it filled again with water up to about 4 feet and then stopped. And I thought it was brackish water, but I took a sample for chemical analysis, and it turned out to be pure drinking water, pure H2O. So it really is quite remarkable. And that made world news. If you Google it, if you go to Google and put in Mikvah Barbados, you will see that thousands of newspapers all over the world picked up the story of the Mikvah. It was almost as popular as Riri's concert the other night.
The plans for the mikvah turned out to be a nice combination of preservation and conservation. They've taken elements. We've been able to distinguish exactly where the mikveh originally sat, and we actually found the building's foundation. So they're rebuilding most of the building back on those original foundations, and we're even preserving a 19th century floor that was contemporary with the mikveh after it was rebuilt from the hurricane of 1831. It's being rebuilt in a manner to which it will continue to have a ruined look. It will look like a ruin as you come in. It won't have a formal roof as we know it. It'll be hidden from sight, and so it'll still look like an archaeology find, even though it's already been found. And there'll be a nice they've changed the entrance from the original, but it'll be a nice entry into the mikveh with displays and all, and then it'll be accessible to the public.
A walk-in tour of historic Bridgetown now moves from the Jewish compound to two familiar buildings completed in 1874, built of local lime and coral stone. The buildings are strategically placed in the heart of our capital city. They are a masterpiece of Gothic architecture, home of the House of Assembly, the Senate Chamber, and the nation's National Heroes Gallery.
There you have the Gothic Parliament buildings that resemble the castle at Disney World, the famous Mad King Ludwig's castle in Bavaria, you know, and right in front of it you have the most magnificent architecture of the most important group of people in Barbados, the street vendors. But it's a wonderful view of the Parliament buildings.
Since this area is located so close to our primary seat of government, just as we have done with National Heroes Square, the old Trafalgar Square, so too I think this area could also be greened. Something like this pole that dominates, the lines could be put on the ground, and it could be turned into a beautiful little civic green square with trees and benches, a square to correlate and match the square on the other side of the Parliament buildings, so that you walk through the front and you look at the National Heroes Square, you come through the back gates where now everybody comes because the security measures in front is all closed off. But as I said, it requires imagination, it requires commitment, it requires planning, and it requires not a lot of long talk, but it requires action.
Today it is a public market where vendors offer for sale regional and local produce. It sits on a site that was occupied by a hotel known for its exquisite style and dining.
Just bear a thought for the hotel that was here, the Trafalgar Hotel. The great three-story Trafalgar Hotel that was the hotel of Bridgetown for 100 years, where Sir Grantley Adams and the parliamentarians of the 1930s and 40s and 50s took lunch until they had the dining room in Parliament, which is in a much later era. But that Trafalgar Hotel was the signature of Bridgetown, and the signature of that hotel was the bus stop and the bread cart. Remember? Purity bread cart. The Purity bread cart that was right outside on the corner as you go around, a three-story building. And my friend Omar Wallace Stewart called me one afternoon in 1978, and he said the Trafalgar Hotel is going to be demolished tomorrow. I'm going down there to paint it. Several of us are going. Come. So I got my sketchbook and I went down, and about half a dozen people were sitting there painting or sketching the Trafalgar Hotel. Next day they started. I went back the next afternoon and I did a sketch of it with a piece gone. And then I didn't get back for about 3 more days, and all that was left was the staircase in the third section. And so I have a painting of mine, which is a triptych, showing the Trafalgar Hotel before the demolition started, with the bread cart and the stop sign, and then the next one showing it half demolished, and then the last one showing simply a staircase. And just think, that hideous, horrible, ancient building has been replaced by an architectural gem. Look at it! Yes.
This is the old city bar. If bars could talk, many an interesting story would be told. The old city bar is often referred to as a landmark of Bridgetown.
And long may it remain so. I would hate to see the day come when somebody decide that I wanted to knock it down because it's too small and build a concrete monster there in its place. Just as it is, it makes a statement. Yeah. To our right, this also used to be a theatre, the Wilhelmina Hall. And then, when I was a child, it was the Olympic Theatre, where you came and all sorts of things happen in the Olympic Theatre. Like what? See? I piqued everybody's imagination now.
Well, having had our imagination piqued, we walk away from the Nichols building, the brickwork, the Jewish compound, the Parliament buildings, the Trafalgar Hotel, the old City Bar and the Wilhelmina Hall. Thank you for staying with me. I'm Sherwood McCaskey. Do join me next time when we continue our walking tour of historic Bridgetown.